Hi, I'm Chris Spizak, and this is the Words You Should Know podcast. A few stolen minutes out of your day to talk words and communication, because our daily lives are surrounded by the evolution of and the influence of words. Forget the grammar police. There is so much more to this conversation. And as a reminder, a free download of fiction editing cheat sheets, family story writing references, and business communication tips are available on my website, getagriponyourgrammar.com. Welcome to episode number 42, where we'll saunter, stroll, and meander through our conversation about hikes and walking. You never realized how sometimes holy and sometimes criminal these simple acts can be, well, at least etymologically speaking. And we'll maybe even get into what punctuation you may be according to your zodiac sign. Seriously? Well, maybe not, but articles like that always make me smile and lead to further questions. You know you're curious. But first, here's the latest in word, language, and writing news. Communications news can mean so many things, from animal communications to writing with artificial intelligence. But today, our updates take us into the world of brain technology. No, not biologically hacking into mouse brains like we discussed a few episodes ago. Specifically, today we'll talk about communications not shared via one's mouth or a traditional writing instrument. Recent studies have been examining how one can communicate merely by thought. Now, the study that first caught my attention on this note lately was focused on a paralyzed patient and how scientists were able to transfer his ideas into written words by having this patient think about not only what he wanted to share, but also about handwriting his ideas, letter by letter. We've seen the past studies about how sometimes we learn better when we handwrite notes versus just listening. Now, this study seems to be tapping into similar science, activating the part of the brain used when handwriting ideas, letter by letter, word by word, to activate the brain in a particular way that creates shareable writing. Now, how often during these Words You Should Know podcasts do I say that a news story is mind-blowing? But this is another one of those cases. The article that first caught my attention on the subject is titled "Man Who is Paralyzed Communicates by Imagining Handwriting." And a link to it is in my show notes, of course, as are a couple others on the subject from Scientific American and Nature.com, if you're interested. And in a similar brain science communications update, another study has recently been published focusing on typing purely with one's thoughts. Well, one's thoughts and a microchip implanted into one's brain. And I know I love examining the merging of communications and futurist technology, but this one's a bit much even for me, at least at this stage. I know some of us dictate texts or emails or speeches or even books into our phones, but dictation through thought, or perhaps dictation isn't even the right word. What will the new word be? Now, this typing by thought process sounds messy and a bit too much of a stream of consciousness ramble. But who knows? I guess there's great power here too, and I can only imagine the editorial tools of the future. But we're not in that future quite yet. Today, we're taking a walk through the present. A walk, a stroll, a saunter. There are so many words for traveling by foot from here to there. However, some of these words have fascinating stories to them in themselves. And I'm not just talking about go hijacking its past tense from another word. Go, went. You know you've had that thought. We've already covered that one way back in episode number 2. But it's time to turn to today's English language history and trivia, specifically the history of these walking words. Now, saunter is a fascinating word, not only for its playful casualness, but because its meaning of walking slowly, without any hurry, in a relaxed manner, has not always been its definition. It seems that saunter came from an earlier Middle English form, meaning to muse, or to reflect or daydream. So if you want to take a thoughtful walk, perhaps you might saunter, but here's where I'm going to bring Henry David Thoreau into this conversation. No, not because we're going to talk about sauntering around Walden Pond, but because he seems to be the origin of a fake etymology story about the word saunter. Perhaps you've seen the social media meme quoting famed writer and environmentalist John Muir, where he explains that one should not hike in the woods, but saunter. As the quote goes, quote, "Way back in the Middle Ages, People used to go on pilgrimages to the Holy Land, and when people in the villages through which they passed asked where they were going, they would reply, à la Sainte Terre, to the Holy Land. And so they became known as Saint Terrors, or Saunters. Now these mountains are our holy land, and we ought to saunter through them reverently, not hike through them. End quote. See the link to the source material in my show notes. Now personally, I love this idea, and there is so much holy that can be found in nature. However, sorry John Muir, but this isn't a true story, if this famous environmentalist's reflection is a correct quote at all. Now bringing things back to Henry David Thoreau, in his essay Walking, he cites a similar story. Specifically, again quote, some, however, would derive the word from sans terre, without land, or a home, which therefore in the good sense will mean having no particular home, but equally home everywhere. For this is the secret of successful sauntering. And the third related but questionable claim is that sauntering comes from the Anglo-French word saunter, from a French word meaning to take risks. But the Oxford English Dictionary, among many others, nicks this theory as false as well. So take it as a lesson. Social media memes aren't always true. As you know, and even wise writers one might respect are known to take wrong turns. And we're keeping this conversation just on language discussions. I know there are bigger conversations to be had about wrong choices and so many of the quote-unquote greats. But in truth, there's no confirmed relation between sauntering and the Holy Lands, or those without a home, or those going off to take risks. But there is a solid connection between sauntering and reflecting, musing, daydreaming, and that is something to seize upon. But sauntering isn't the only walk-like word to go through transformation. Stroll is another. Now maybe you think of stroll as similar to saunter. To stroll is to take a casual walk. You can push a stroller with babies inside as you go for your stroll. How sweet and innocent is that? Except for the fact that it actually isn't at all. I think this is where we need to insert ominous music, no? The word stroll likely comes from a Swiss-German word, meaning not just to walk about, but also to loaf, coming from a related word for vagabond, vagrant, or traveling fortune teller. Now this seems to come from an Italian word for astrologer, astrologo, astrologer, stroll. You can actually see the connection between these two words, but in this way, those who historically strolled were considered troublemakers and con artists. Now, cross-cultural and class judgments aside, oh, look, another big conversation that could come out of this. Stroll has come a long way, hasn't it? Will this make you rethink pushing a stroller with innocent babies inside? Would you rather call it a buggy or a pram to avoid the confusion? Now, that's up to you, but I think you're solid in its modern usage. Oh, the vices of a stroll. And the holiness and virtue of sauntering. Now, there are so many great stories and etymology tales hiding in walking words. Meander comes from the Greek name of an ancient river in Asia Minor, present-day Turkey, which has a winding course. To hike seems to come from a word that also gives us the word hitch. So in some ways, you could argue that you could say hike instead of hitchhike because they came from the same place. Maybe. I've seen this theorized, and some of these word theories crack me up. But there you go. And lastly, walk, of course, came into English in the 1200s. Walk is a mix-up of a few different words, specifically the Old English word walken, to roll, toss, or journey about, and the Old English word welkian, to roll up or muffle up. Now, how walk walked from these meanings to its present-day definition is a language stroll for another day. And if we're talking side notes, I should probably mention that if you were to walk, stroll, or saunter through Paris, we could also give a little shout out to our conversation about gargoyles a couple of episodes back. The Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris now has a fundraising campaign for renovations, including the ability for one to adopt one of their stone grotesques, as in the figures many call gargoyles, but without the drainage spouts through their throats and mouths. There's so much to ponder on a walk, right? Moving on to our language challenge for this episode. I quoted words attributed to John Muir and Henry David Thoreau today. And yes, the hyperlinks to those references, as always, are included in my show notes. However, when you are speaking about a quote, what is the proper way to do so? Is it quote, unquote? Or is it quote, end quote? There's a debate here, and there's also a correct answer. Quote, unquote, or quote, End quote. The answers, as always, can be found on my website at getagriponyourgrammar.com. As for my personal update, honestly, I am in that waiting stage that is ever present in a writer's life. Books are being pitched, new projects are in their pre-tadpole stage, not yet morphing into what they will be. And it's in this space that I recently stumbled upon an article titled, "Written in the Stars, Your Punctuation Mark Based on Your Zodiac Sign." Am I a big believer in horoscopes and zodiac signs? Not really. But I'm easily distracted sometimes in this pre-tadpole stage of waiting and planning. So, I'm a Libra, and to quote from this article, "Natural mediators, you like to keep everything nice and balanced. Like a hyphen, you make things connected, increase readability, and maintain symmetry, just as a Libra should." So, not a dash, but a hyphen. Oh yes, there is a difference, and the Leos out there get the EM dash. What's an EM dash? Wait, there are different types of dashes. Yes, there are, and these are the details of the world that the editors geek out on. Now, I'm not sure how I'm quite feeling about my hyphen. I think it's working for me, but the history of disappearing hyphens is coming to mind. So is this an added prediction? Yikes! Now, I'm totally being playful with this because sometimes we need to embrace a little space for that in our lives. And if you're interested in your sign's punctuation, I have the link saved for you, don't you worry. I didn't hear the request directly from your brain, whether you're imagining the letters of your message or otherwise, but in this moment of waiting and thinking, I can't help but share. I'm curious about your reaction. Are you curious or confused about the words you use every day? For more information on language news, trivia, tips, and explorations, I invite you to sign up for my monthly newsletter at getagriponyourgrammar.com. That's also a great place for free downloads and to learn more about my books, Get a Grip on Your Grammar, the Novel Editing Workbook, and the Family Story Workbook. Thank you so much to those of you who have taken the time to review or rate this podcast, and if you haven't, why don't you head over to wherever you listen and do so? I am so grateful for it. And as always, I invite you to share your latest writing updates or insights with me. I love hearing from you. Again, connect at getagriponyourgrammar.com. Until next time, words, language, communication. We've got this.